Julian Carter's world collapsed in a matter of seconds. He walked in on his boyfriend of 3 years, Lucas, tangled in a passionate embrace with his childhood best friend, Tyler. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Julian could have imagined. He had trusted Lucas with his heart, and Tyler, his lifelong confidant, had become the ultimate backstabber. The love Julian had once felt now felt like a cruel joke, and the painful realization that his two closest people had conspired against him left him breathless and shattered. His heart was broken, and he didn't know if it would ever heal. Across the country in New York, Ethan Brooks, the driven and emotionally distant CEO of Brooks Apparel, was living a life devoid of emotional connection. Though successful in business, Ethan avoided any form of real intimacy, preferring fleeting one-night stands to deeper bonds. When his company needed a new strategic partner, he hired Julian, unaware of the emotional storm that would soon cross his path. The first meeting between them was anything but smooth. Julian's raw pain and Ethan's guarded demeanor set the stage for a turbulent relationship neither was prepared for. Julian's first day at Brooks Apparel was a blur. His mind was still reeling from the heartbreak, and the corporate world felt cold and overwhelming. He tried to focus on his work, but every interaction felt like a reminder of the pain he was carrying. Ethan, as usual, was aloof and distant, his icy professionalism creating a stark contrast to Julian's vulnerability. Whenever their paths crossed, the tension was palpable, and Julian couldn't help but notice the way Ethan's sharp gaze lingered on him, even though he remained silent. Despite the friction, Julian's skills quickly impressed Ethan, and they were forced to collaborate on a crucial project. The dynamic between them was complicated. Julian's creativity and drive clashed with Ethan's pragmatism and control. Every meeting became a battlefield of ideas, with neither willing to back down. The professional divide between them made it clear that working together would be difficult, but neither could ignore the growing attraction simmering just beneath the surface. The lines between business and personal were beginning to blur, and neither knew how to stop it. As the days passed, Julian and Ethan continued to clash in the office, but something began to shift. Their project, which had initially seemed doomed, started to gain traction as they reluctantly found common ground. Late nights spent working together revealed sides of each other neither had expected. Julian, behind his walls, was surprisingly sharp and insightful, while Ethan, though guarded, showed a level of respect for Julian's perspective that he hadn't shown anyone before. Despite their differences, they began to rely on one another more, becoming unlikely allies in the pursuit of success. Still, beneath their professional rapport, there was an undeniable pull between them. Julian couldn't ignore the way Ethan's sharp eyes followed him, the small moments of vulnerability that slipped through Ethan's otherwise impenetrable demeanor. Ethan, in turn, began to recognize the spark in Julian's eyes, a fire he hadn't seen in years. But both men remained cautious, unwilling to let their fragile connection bloom into something more. Yet the attraction lingered, growing stronger with every passing day. One evening, during a particularly intense work session, Julian found himself on the edge. The weight of his heartbreak, paired with the stress of the project, broke him down. In a rare moment of weakness, he admitted to Ethan that he had been betrayed by the two people he loved most, his ex-boyfriend and his best friend. The pain was still raw, and Julian's voice trembled as he spoke. Ethan, initially unsure how to react, found himself listening, really listening, for the first time. He couldn't recall the last time he had genuinely connected with anyone, and this raw, unguarded side of Julian stirred something inside him. As the silence hung in the air, Ethan opened up in a way he hadn't before. He admitted that he had spent years avoiding real connections, using one-night stands as distractions. He feared love because it had always left him vulnerable. The unexpected vulnerability between them was a game-changer. Julian, though still wary of getting hurt again, began to see Ethan in a new light. And for the first time in months, he felt the possibility of something real. After that night, Julian and Ethan's relationship shifted. The awkward tension remained, but now it was charged with something deeper. Late-night work sessions became the norm, but there was something different in the air. Ethan started to let his guard down, and Julian found himself laughing again, something he hadn't done in months. One evening, after a successful presentation, they found themselves alone, the celebration of the project's success slowly fading into an intimate silence. Without thinking, Ethan reached out and touched Julian's arm. The spark that had been quietly simmering between them exploded in that moment, and before either could stop it, Their lips met in a tentative but heated kiss. The kiss was brief but left them both breathless. Julian pulled away quickly, his heart racing in a way it hadn't in a long time. Ethan, equally stunned, said nothing at first. They stood there, each processing what had just happened. Julian, his heart conflicted between wanting to explore what was blooming between them and the fear of opening himself to hurt again, quickly excused himself. Ethan remained, staring after him, unsure of how to proceed, but knowing that something significant had changed between them. Ethan couldn't get the kiss out of his mind. He had always prided himself on keeping things casual, never letting emotions get in the way. But Julian was different. The more he saw of him, the more he realized that there was something more than just physical attraction. Yet, despite the growing connection, Ethan kept his distance, unsure of how to proceed. Julian, too, felt the tension but resisted it. He knew he was vulnerable and scared to let anyone in again. But fate had other plans. One evening, after a particularly frustrating meeting, the two men found themselves alone once more. Julian's frustration boiled over, and before he knew it, he was standing face to face with Ethan, their closeness undeniable. Ethan, as if possessed by something beyond his control, leaned in and kissed him again. This time, it wasn't tentative. It was intense, urgent. The kiss was filled with all the emotions they had kept bottled up for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their hearts pounding. Julian's walls had cracked, and he realized, despite the fear, that he didn't want to fight this anymore. The kiss changed everything. Julian and Ethan, still reluctant to fully acknowledge what had just happened, began to spend more time together. Work meetings became less about business and more about learning about each other. Ethan began to open up more about his past, his fears, and his failed attempts at love. Julian, in turn, started to trust Ethan more, sharing the depth of the pain that had plagued him for so long. Despite their different approaches to love, they were drawn to each other in a way neither could fully explain. Slowly, they began to let their guards down, and with every passing day, their connection grew stronger. One evening, after a particularly long workday, they found themselves at a bar, laughing and talking about everything and nothing at all. For the first time, Julian felt light again, and Ethan, for once, didn't feel the need to escape into distractions. They talked about their dreams, their fears, and everything in between. In that moment, Julian realized that maybe, just maybe, he could trust Ethan with his heart. Ethan, too, began to see Julian not just as a colleague, but as someone he could build a future with. They weren't there yet, but for the first time, the possibility of something real seemed within reach. Just as things were starting to settle between Julian and Ethan, Julian's ex-boyfriend, Lucas, came back into the picture. He reached out to Julian, apologizing for his betrayal and begging for another chance. The old feelings resurfaced for Julian, who found himself torn between the past and the present. Ethan noticed the tension and, though he tried to remain calm, his jealousy and insecurity bubbled to the surface. Julian was unsure of what to do. He had spent so long grieving over Lucas's betrayal, and now the return of the man who had broken his heart forced him to confront everything he had tried to forget. Ethan, watching Julian struggle, knew this was a pivotal moment. He wanted to be there for Julian, but his own fears about being replaced by someone from the past began to cloud his judgment. The more Julian wrestled with his emotions, the more Ethan distanced himself, unsure of how to handle the situation. Julian felt the weight of his dilemma. Could he really move on from Lucas, or would his heart always belong to the man who had shattered it? The tension between him and Ethan grew, and Julian realized that to move forward with Ethan, he would need to make a choice. The situation came to a head when Lucas showed up at the office, trying to convince Julian to give their relationship another shot. Julian's emotions were in turmoil, torn between his history with Lucas and his growing feelings for Ethan. Ethan, unable to hold back any longer, confronted Julian, demanding to know what he intended to do. The confrontation was raw and heated, with Julian feeling cornered and betrayed once again. Ethan, feeling rejected, tried to walk away, but something in Julian snapped. He couldn't lose Ethan, not after everything they had been through. In a moment of clarity, Julian admitted his feelings for Ethan, promising to leave the past behind and start fresh. Ethan, hearing the sincerity in Julian's voice, softened. He had feared rejection for so long that he had almost pushed Julian away. The vulnerability they shared in that moment, Julian admitting his fears and Ethan revealing his own, was the breakthrough they both needed. With the tension finally broken, they agreed to move forward together, leaving the past behind. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, both men believed in the possibility of a future together. As their relationship continued to develop, Ethan knew he had to come clean about his feelings. He had always kept things light, but now, with Julian by his side, he realized how much he had grown. One evening, after a particularly intimate conversation about their future, Ethan confessed that he was no longer afraid of love. He had spent so many years avoiding it, but with Julian he felt something real, something lasting. He admitted that he was scared of opening up, but knew that he didn't want to live without Julian in his life. Julian, still hesitant but moved by Ethan's honesty, confessed that he felt the same. He had been hurt, but Ethan made him believe that love was worth the risk. They both acknowledged their fears, but they also knew that they had something special. As they stood there, holding each other, they promised to take things one day at a time. The path ahead was uncertain, but with each other, they were ready to face whatever came next. The decision to open their hearts to one another marked the beginning of a new chapter for Julian and Ethan. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to believe in the possibility of love. They spent more time together, both in and out of the office, learning to navigate the complexities of a relationship while maintaining their professional boundaries. Julian was still cautious, afraid of being hurt again, but Ethan's patience and sincerity slowly began to break down the walls around his heart. However, with every step forward, both men faced challenges. Ethan's workaholic tendencies often clashed with Julian's need for emotional connection. Julian wanted to know more about Ethan's past, about the reasons why he had avoided love for so long, but Ethan struggled to share. He was still haunted by his previous failures in relationships and wasn't ready to confront the deep wounds from his past. Julian knew they had a long road ahead of them, but he was determined to stay by Ethan's side, despite the fear that lingered in the back of his mind. Their relationship was put to the test when Ethan was forced to make a difficult decision regarding a business partnership that could either make or break his company. Julian, with his expertise and insight, was asked to weigh in on the situation. Despite their growing closeness, Julian struggled to separate his personal feelings from the professional conflict. The tension between them reached a boiling point as they argued over what was best for the company, with Julian feeling frustrated that Ethan was putting work ahead of their relationship. Ethan, too, felt the strain. He was used to handling everything on his own and had never been one to rely on others. But Julian's perspective, his unwavering belief in the importance of balance between personal and professional life, forced Ethan to confront his own flaws. The argument, though heated, ended in a moment of clarity for both men. Ethan apologized for shutting Julian out, and Julian realized that he couldn't hide behind his fears forever. They both knew that they needed to work together, not just in business, but in their relationship as well. Julian's ex-boyfriend, Lucas, continued to linger in the background, causing ripples in Julian's relationship with Ethan. Though Julian had made it clear that he wanted to move on, Lucas wasn't giving up so easily. One day, out of the blue, Julian received a letter from Lucas, begging for forgiveness and asking him to reconsider their breakup. The letter sent Julian into a spiral of confusion. He was tempted to revisit the past, unsure whether he was truly ready to let go of what had once been a part of him. Ethan, noticing the change in Julian's demeanor, gently pushed him to confront his feelings. He couldn't compete with the ghost of Julian's past, but he wanted to support Julian in every way. The vulnerability in their conversation that night led to a breakthrough. Julian admitted that he was still haunted by the betrayal, but realized that his future lay with Ethan, not with someone who had already proven unworthy of his trust. The truth was clear. Julian needed to let go of Lucas once and for all if he was going to have a chance at something real with Ethan. Julian made the difficult decision to completely cut ties with Lucas, an act that was as liberating as it was painful. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. He was no longer held hostage by the past, and he could finally focus on the future with Ethan. That night, the two of them sat together, their hands entwined, and talked about their dreams and fears. Julian confessed that he wasn't sure if he was ready to fully open his heart again, but he was willing to try. Ethan, sensing Julian's hesitation, didn't push him. Instead, he promised to be patient, understanding that trust and love took time to build. They made a pact to take things slow, to savor the moments of connection and growth. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with every step they took together, they felt more certain that they were on the right path. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. It didn't take long for the perfect image of their relationship to crack. One evening, as they worked late into the night, a miscommunication led to a heated argument. Ethan accused Julian of being too idealistic, while Julian argued that Ethan was too closed off. Their differences, which had once been charming, now felt like insurmountable obstacles. The fight was explosive, with both men saying things they didn't mean. For a moment, Julian wondered if they were even meant to be together. In the aftermath, both men retreated into their own spaces, nursing their bruised egos. Julian considered leaving, afraid that the differences between them were too great to overcome. Ethan, too, wondered if he had made a mistake by allowing his emotions to get the best of him. But as the days passed, both realized that they couldn't just walk away. The love they had shared was worth fighting for. They apologized to each other, acknowledging that their disagreements didn't mean the end, but rather an opportunity to grow stronger together. After their first major fight, Julian and Ethan realized that compromise was the key to moving forward. They sat down and had a long, honest conversation about their needs and boundaries. Ethan admitted that he had a tendency to shut people out when things got tough, while Julian confessed that he often expected too much too soon. They both acknowledged their flaws, but made a commitment to work through them together. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension, but each compromise brought them closer. Their relationship began to take on a new rhythm. They found a balance between work and personal time, learning to prioritize each other without sacrificing their ambitions. Julian and Ethan grew stronger as a couple, each learning to appreciate the other's differences. Julian's trust in Ethan deepened, and Ethan began to open up more, sharing his fears and desires. Though their journey was still far from perfect, they were finally on the same page, ready to face whatever challenges came their way. As their relationship deepened, external pressures began to mount. Ethan's business was facing challenges, and the stress began to take a toll on him. Julian, though supportive, felt increasingly sidelined as Ethan threw himself into his work. He began to question whether their relationship could survive if Ethan was always too busy for him. The fear of being abandoned crept in again, and Julian struggled to keep his insecurities in check. Ethan, too, felt the strain. He had always been a workaholic, and now, with Julian in his life, he was forced to confront how much he had neglected his personal relationships. He realized that he had been unintentionally pushing Julian away, and the thought of losing him terrified him. Ethan took a step back, reassessing his priorities, and promised to make time for Julian, no matter how busy life got. The pressure was immense, but they were both determined to make it work, understanding that they needed to find a way to balance love and ambition. One night, after a long day of stress and uncertainty, Julian and Ethan found themselves sitting on the rooftop of Ethan's apartment, staring at the city lights. Julian spoke softly, telling Ethan that he had never fully trusted anyone after the betrayal he had suffered, but Ethan had made him believe in love again. Ethan, moved by Julian's words, confessed that he, too, had struggled to trust. The walls he had built around himself were slowly coming down, piece by piece. For the first time, they realized that they had both been afraid of the same thing, giving their hearts completely and risking the pain of loss. As they sat together, hands intertwined, they both knew that trust was something that had to be earned and nurtured over time. They were both learning how to love again, how to trust again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, they felt that maybe, just maybe, they could build something lasting together. Julian's past, particularly his tumultuous relationship with Lucas, continued to cast a shadow over his present. One evening, Julian's ex reached out once more, asking for closure. Julian felt conflicted. He knew he couldn't move forward with Ethan if he didn't confront his past, but he also feared that revisiting old wounds would reopen scars that hadn't fully healed. Ethan, sensing Julian's internal battle, encouraged him to face his past head-on. He was supportive but also firm, knowing that Julian needed closure to fully embrace their future together. The meeting with Lucas was tense and emotionally charged. Julian listened to Lucas's apologies, but he realized that no amount of words could undo the damage that had been done. He left the meeting with a sense of finality, knowing that he had done everything he could to heal. When he returned to Ethan, he felt lighter, freer, and more committed than ever to their relationship. The past was behind him, and he was finally ready to look toward the future. With the past now closed, Julian and Ethan began to build their future together. They planned trips, shared dreams, and discussed what kind of life they wanted to create. The road hadn't been easy, but they had fought for each other and had grown stronger as a result. Julian had learned to trust again, and Ethan had learned to open his heart. Together, they felt like they could take on the world. But as they looked ahead, new challenges awaited. Ethan's business was expanding rapidly, and Julian was offered an exciting opportunity to lead a project overseas. Both men were thrilled by their professional successes, but they knew it would test the strength of their relationship. They promised to support each other, no matter how far apart they might be, determined to show that love could thrive even in the face of distance. Julian's decision to take the overseas project marked the beginning of a long-distance phase in their relationship. The first few weeks were filled with excitement and daily calls, but as time went on, the strain of being apart began to weigh on both of them. Ethan threw himself into his work to distract himself from the loneliness, while Julian struggled to adjust to the challenges of his new role. The distance amplified their insecurities, making them question whether they could truly make it work. Despite the struggles, both men were committed to each other. They found creative ways to stay connected, sending each other little gifts and planning virtual date nights. Every time they spoke, they reminded each other of the love they shared and the future they were building together. Though the distance was hard, it taught them the value of communication and trust, deepening their bond in ways they hadn't anticipated. While working overseas, Julian found himself growing close to a colleague, Marco, who was charming and supportive. Though Julian remained loyal to Ethan, the attention from Marco stirred feelings of doubt. Was their relationship strong enough to survive the distance? Ethan, on the other hand, found himself reconnecting with an old friend who seemed to be more than a little interested in him. Both men were faced with the temptation to stray but were determined to stay true to each other. When Julian confessed his fears to Ethan, it led to an honest conversation about their commitment. They admitted that the distance had taken its toll but reaffirmed their love and their determination to make things work. Their ability to confront these challenges head-on, instead of running from them, proved that their relationship was stronger than any obstacle. After months apart, Julian and Ethan finally reunited. The moment they saw each other at the airport, all the struggles and doubts melted away. They embraced tightly, overwhelmed by the relief of being together again. The time apart had tested their love, but it had also strengthened it. Julian told Ethan about everything he had learned during his time overseas, and Ethan shared how much he had missed him. That night, as they lay together, they talked about their future with newfound clarity. They decided that no matter where life took them, they would always prioritize each other. The reunion marked a new chapter in their relationship, one where they were no longer afraid of the challenges but ready to face them together. Julian and Ethan decided to take the next big step in their relationship, moving in together. They found a beautiful apartment in the heart of the city, a place where they could start building their life as a couple. The process of creating a home together was filled with joy, but it also brought its share of challenges. They had to learn to navigate each other's habits and quirks, but every argument only brought them closer. As they decorated their new space, they talked about their dreams and plans for the future. They envisioned a life filled with love, laughter, and shared experiences. For the first time, they felt like they had truly found a place where they belonged. Their home wasn't just a physical space. It was a reflection of the love they had built together. Years later, as they stood together at a rooftop celebration for Ethan's business success, Julian and Ethan reflected on how far they had come. Their journey had been anything but easy, filled with heartbreak, challenges, and growth. But through it all, they had chosen each other, time and time again. They had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about commitment, patience, and the willingness to fight for one another. As they raised their glasses to toast the life they had built together, Julian looked at Ethan and smiled. "I never thought I'd find this," he said softly. Ethan took his hand and replied, "Neither did I. But I'm glad we did." The city light sparkled around them, but the brightest light of all was the love they had created. A love that had endured every storm and come out stronger on the other side.